Hello, David.
For you.
It is so exciting to meet you. I'm Dana Hoff. I'm the executive director of Autism Tree.
And
Very,
I'm Rebecca Barron, and I'm the director of operations.
very nice to meet you. My internet is down at our house at the lake, so I have a friend who owns a restaurant, so I'm using her office to make
What lake are you at?
Smith Mountain Lake. It's in Southern Virginia.
Oh, okay.
Wow, way to be resourceful.
I know.
Always have a backup.
Yeah, very smart.
Well, this is really special. Otto has a very big goal of changing the narrative of how people see people that are multimodality communicators, is what they like to be called.
Yes.
And it's just been, David, one of the biggest blessings in the 22 years since my husband and I started Autism Tree when our son was diagnosed. And he's currently just graduated Duke Law School and he's taking the bar exam this week. So it really shows you the spectrum. And if there's one thing I can tell you, I want you to know is one of my favorite things is that my son Garrett, who's 25, and Otto, who's the first typer to enter USD, Otto says that my son Garrett is his brother from another mother, and I can't even describe to you how happy that makes me. Hi, Otto. I'm talking about you to David and telling him my favorite thing that you tell me
Oh,
that Garrett's like your brother from another mother. I was just trying to bring forward how Autism Tree started and how much I love Otto, what you've done with changing the narrative, and we're just part of your crew, Autism Tree is. So David, this is Otto Lana.
hello.
So keep an eye out on the chat because Otto will be typing furiously.
Okay,
He usually does. He types circles around us.
I'm sure.
Yeah, but I want you to know, David, in running the daily operations or just doing Autism Tree every day, I feel anything that comes at me, I can completely handle between Otto and Garrett in terms of just the dynamics of how people don't understand neurodiversity and with some of the political stuff that was going on, I felt really stressed, but my son and Otto, they didn't at all.
They just marshaled on. I love that. That's incredible. One of my nephews is a neurodivergent. He's thinking about building a business that would help businesses and other entities learn to work better with people who are from a wide diversity of experiences, backgrounds, and abilities and capabilities. And he was here over the weekend and we were talking about it. And I just think it's high time that we do more things like that. We have to. I mean, inclusivity makes the world stronger across the board.
Oh, I just had the chills. Thank you so much for sharing that with me. That is such an alignment with what we've been trying to do for honestly 22 years. This is your nephew?
My nephew, yes.
Wow. And how old is he?
He is 37. Yes.
Okay. Wow. Well, tell him I would love to meet him.
Okay, I will.
Hi,
Otto,
Danielle.
Otto says in the chat, "Hi everyone." We're just adding people as we come in. Otto says, "You're the goat, David. Can I call you David?"
Yes. I answered him absolutely. Yes.
Oh, it's so nice to see everybody.
Happy Saturday.
Yes, happy Saturday.
Wonderful. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and hello, introduce myself. I'm Rebecca Barron, the Director of Operations. If I haven't met you, welcome to our virtual book club. This is co-hosted by Danielle Levy. Danielle, why don't you wave your camera? And Otto Lana, who's our amazing typer and multimodality communicator. I'm so excited. Otto, we are recording, just FYI. So we'll post it on our YouTube channel as well. So people can join and after and watch later. The Mod Squad, which is Otto's amazing typer like friends, like best friends. I saw that they're here too. Happy to be here. Okay, I love it. Otto, you can do a message from your iPad. Yes, whenever you're ready.
Good morning or afternoon or evening, depending on your time zone. I am Otto Lana, coming to you from San Diego, California. I want to begin with a huge thank you to Mr. Baldacci for carving time out of his absolutely packed schedule to log in today. We are celebrating Disability Pride Month and the 35th anniversary of the signing of the ADA. Today, I want to thank my friend, Angie Kim, as she explained to Mr. Baldacci that I am the real deal, not some zealot that emailed him repeatedly to join our book club. But I bet she also told him, I am unrelenting, and ambitious, and a good time. And thank you to Kristen White for assisting in scheduling this event, and Rebecca, Director of Operations at Autism Tree Project, and Dana, the founder of Autism Tree Project, the one who always says yes, yes to the mess. We will figure out the details later. And Todd, and Garrett, and Dr. Levy, and my favorite co-host ever, Danielle, and the citizens of Otto Nation who have logged in this morning. Thank you all. None of this is possible without all of you. I am grateful and feel blessed beyond belief. Literacy is a passion of mine, mostly because I was deemed illiterate and was denied access to books and an academic education until I was 12. Can you even imagine that? We are in the 21st century and children, here in America, are being denied access to age-appropriate academic education. This is what this book club represents to me, a stand against ableism. I cannot take on the administration. I cannot take on the Department of Education. But I can provide access to people like me, people who love a good book and a great conversation. I see myself as a bridge between the deniers and the desperate. We will never change the minds of those who refuse to adapt. But we don't have to. We will always find a workaround. We belong here. Everyone belongs here. Shameless plug. Ha 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 ha. Thank you for listening. Let's get started.
Thank you, Otto.
That's great.
It's amazing. I would just want to do a quick little information about Autism Tree, what's coming up in our community. It won't take long, but I wanted to invite everybody because we just moved into a new office space and we love our new office space and we're excited to share it with everyone. We can now host community events again in our office. So we have a grand opening party coming up on Saturday, August 23rd. So if you haven't RSVP'd yet, we would love to see you there. For those of you who are here, and yeah, you're welcome and you can scan the code. This is that. And then I also wanted to, of course, have Dana share a little bit more about our amazing conference that we have coming up as well, which is coming up on Friday, November 7th. So Dana, you can take it away. There you go. Perfect.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, this is going to be our 11th year doing our global hybrid neurodiversity conference. And if you haven't registered, you can register now. It's Friday, November 7th at the Sanford Consortium for Regenerative Medicine. It has been incredible what I've been working with Otto and Danielle's father, Dr. Levy, on. We always have a panel. And usually, David, we've had many of your friends, author friends, be part of this conference. And we're so excited because this year is the first time that we have a young documentary filmmaker who is working with us. And Otto's been working tirelessly on this project with his best friend's family. It's about his best friend's family, who's another typer. And the filmmaker's nephew, who's a typer, stars in it as his best friend, whose family is. His name's Peter, and he's a typer. So I can barely talk about it. I'm so emotional about it. I'm so excited about it. And I'm so grateful, Otto, for all you do for this conference every year. I can't even find the words, but the goal is just to change the conversation, to really change the way people see and understand neurodiversity. So I hope to see you all there this year. And David, of course, we'd love to invite you, but we know you're really busy. And we're going to turn it over now to our incredible co-hosts, Danielle and Otto. And thank you everyone for coming out today. And David, we couldn't be more excited to share this time with you.
Thank you.
Can everybody see the slideshow? Thumbs up? Okay, good. Danielle, why don't you created this amazing slideshow. Thank you so much. So why don't you kick it off?
The ambient noise isn't too loud, right?
Nope.
Okay, perfect. I'm at a Starbucks right now, so thank you very much. I know I needed that coffee. Thank you very much for joining our book club. We really appreciate it. Um, I feel like it's a really fun pastime for me to do this with Otto and ATPF just because we have so much history together. And additionally, I love reading, so kind of a good mix of those things. So these are the two books that we were discussing today. And we are just going to introduce our author and then have him pretty much take over and just talk to us about who he is and what he does. Um, so David has been writing since, and this is from his website, since childhood when his mother gave him a lined notebook on which to write down his stories. Much later, when David thanked her for being the spark that ignited his writing career, she revealed that she'd given him the notebook to keep him quiet because every mom needs a breakdown one. David published his first novel, Absolute Power, in 1996. The feature film adaptation followed, with Clint Eastwood as its director and star. In total, he has published 52 novels for adults. All have been national and international bestsellers, and several have been adapted for film and television. His novels are published in over 45 languages and in more than 80 countries, with 150 million copies sold worldwide. David has also published 7 novels for young readers. A lifelong Virginian, David received his bachelor's degree from Virginia Commonwealth University and his law degree from the University of Virginia School of Law, after which he practiced law in Washington, D.C. In addition to being a prolific writer, David is a devoted philanthropist, and his greatest efforts are dedicated to his family's Whiskey Well Foundation. Established by David and his wife, Michelle, the Whiskey Well Foundation supports family and adult literacy programs in the United States. In 2008, the foundation partnered with Feeding America to launch Feeding Body and Mind, a program to address the connection between literacy, poverty, and hunger. Through Feeding Body and Mind, more than 1 million new and gently used books have been collected and distributed through food banks to families in need. David and his family currently live in Virginia. So thank you very much for your, prolific career, and thank you for joining us again. These contributions really help us to involve everyone and really embody the spirit of inclusivity as we were discussing. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. And I guess tell us about the books, and we have a few guiding questions, and then people can obviously put in the chat things they want to ask.
And I'll help moderate.
Yeah. Okay. So I normally write thrillers. I've written some fantasy series for Scholastic. My adult publisher is Hachette, but A Calamity of Souls and Strangers in Time are 2 historical thrillers. And I wrote A Calamity of Souls that came out last year. I was a trial lawyer in Washington, D.C. for about 10 years. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, the old capital of the Confederacy, where all the statues are on Monument Avenue, or used to be. They're all gone now, thank goodness. And I grew up in a world of complete segregation, where blacks were not allowed legally to mingle with white people. I'm an old guy, but I'm not 100 years old. So that was part of my life growing up. And I remember it very well. And I was surrounded by people who thought that that sort of segregation was perfectly fine. And it was all right to separate people based on the color of their skins. And I might have grown up with that perspective too. But my parents took my brother and sister I to the library every week. And, Mark Twain used to say that travel is fatal to prejudice. He was the most traveled man of his generation. He traveled the world several times. And he meant was once you meet people where they live, you find out they're just like you, no matter how they read, how they pray, how they learn, how they speak, how they dress. Doesn't matter. We're all human beings. I couldn't travel outside of Richmond when I was a kid. I didn't have the opportunity, but I like to think that I traveled the world without a plane ticket or a passport through books. If you think about it, if you're a diligent reader, you will meet far more people in books than you ever will in real life. And books can take you to places you cannot go in real life, like the past and the future, which gives you incredible perspective about the present day. So A Calamity of Souls really was about my growing up. It's a courtroom drama set in 1968, which was a tumultuous year in this country. I don't think anybody other than me on this screen was probably alive in 1968, but the Vietnam War was going full bore. It was tearing the country completely apart. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated in June. Dr. Martin Luther King was killed in April. You had the Democratic National Convention riot in Chicago, and people thought 1968 was going to be the last year there was going to be a United States of America. That was it. And that's why I decided to set the novel during that time. It took about 12 or 13 years to write A Calamity of Souls because I wrote off and on. I didn't know if it was still relevant, quite frankly. I started writing it on Christmas Day in 2011 because my wife gave me a blank journal. I say this, don't give a writer blank paper on a major holiday because you'll never see them again for the rest of the day. And for all I know, that was my wife's intent to get rid of me for Christmas. Um, but I started writing, Calamity of Souls. That was the title. I wrote it. I wrote the first 150 pages of the novel by hand. I like to think in cursive. I think better in cursive when the pen is flowing across the page. And then I set the novel aside for years because I didn't know if it was relevant anymore. It opens with a very brutal crime scene. Two people have been murdered. Police come in. They find one man there. He's a black man, and what they do to him is terrible. Um, and then I went back to it probably 5 or 6 years later. I thought, if I didn't tell you it was 1968, you might just assume it was today. It was contemporary novel. So I thought, well, it's probably still relevant then. So I finished writing the novel, and my publisher didn't even know I was writing it. Sometimes I do that to them. I just think of a novel I want to write and I work on it, and it shows up in their door and they're like, where did this come from? And I said, well, it just came from here, because that's what I do. And a lot of writers, their very first novel is very autobiographical because it's very potent material. They live through it, so they have this visceral attachment to it. And that's what their first novel is. I had to write 51 novels before I could get to the point where I could write an autobiographical novel in A Calamity of Souls. And that's what I finally did. And I like to think that, it was time for me to tell that story. I think it's still relevant. And I took on two isms in A Calamity of Souls. Racism clearly was a defining moment in that novel, but the other ism I took on was sexism. My parents had enormous families. So growing up, I had 17 aunts on both sides. They were all formidable, intelligent women, and not a single one of them was able to achieve their potential in life because of the era they grew up in. Because back then the ceiling wasn't glass, it was concrete. And I always remember growing up the wasted potential for those women and the opportunity and the good things they could have done for the world if they had been allowed to fully realize their potential. So in the novel, A Calamity of Souls, the very best attorney in the whole novel is a Black woman named Desiree DuBose, because that's how I see life. I see life where people who never had any opportunity but can still rise to a certain level had to work 6 times as hard as a white person would have to do, a white male in particular, to get to the same level. That's the person I want to bet my life on, not the person who has it pretty easy. So I wanted to address both racism and sexism in the novel because I thought they were very important to address. That is the key difference between a book like this and To Kill a Mockingbird, where a great novel, a great story. I loved reading it. I've read it several times over the years, but it still is sort of a white savior novel where a white attorney comes in and saves a Black person in a court of law. I did not want this novel to be this. I wanted this to be a unification theme where I had a white young lawyer who was totally out of his depth, had never fought against racism his whole life, didn't agree with it, but had never fought against it. And a Black woman comes together and they have to team up to see if they can win this case or not. And that's the whole theme of the book, is about bringing people together from all different sorts of experiences, lifestyles. We're all human beings. And it's much better to be united than divided. And that's sort of the theme of Calamity of Souls. And I spun that same theme into A Strangers in Time. It's set in 1944 in London during World War II. And a million books have been written about World War II. And why I decided to write one is because I thought World War II, again, I was not alive during World War II, just for full disclosure, but I've always considered World War II sort of the defining moment, and it gives you the entire spectrum of human experience because you had good on one side, evil on one side, and you had the full spectrum of personal experience in between those two bookends. It was a horrible time for the world. The world was aflame. It was a fire. There were, people were fighting everywhere all over the globe. And it looked really hopeless early on, that evil and the bad side was going to win out over the good. And I decided in my novel, I was just going to focus on three people. That was all. A boy from the East End named Charlie, who had almost nothing. East End of London is very, very poor. I had a girl from the West End named Molly. That's a very affluent part of London, and she had a lot. And then I had sort of in the middle a bookseller from the Strand. Um, and all three of them had suffered loss in the novel. But for the war, though, those three people would have met. And the old saying that war makes strange bedfellows. The only reason these three people met is because of World War II. And during the course of the war, they realized that even though they know very little about one another, that they really have to come together unified in order to try to survive the war, because they can't do that individually. They're not going to survive the war if they stay separated. So they come together unified to try to survive World War II. And I just thought it was a good lesson because we're going through some difficult times now, clearly, where things look hopeless and they don't look like they're getting any better. And I think World War II is a good lesson for us to know that we have been through terribly challenging times before when it looked bleak and hopeless, and we still managed to make it out the other end reasonably intact so that we can move on. And if you're going to go through bad times in life, it's much better to go through them with people who care about you and love you and support you, and you can do the same for them. Human beings going through really bad times, it's not a really good idea. I know sometimes they have no choice in the matter. They go through them because there's no one around to support them. But I think that human beings together are better than human beings apart. So those are really the two themes of both novels.
So Otto asked, you and Angie have that in common, being a lawyer in common. Do you miss practicing law?
I don't miss a lot of the people I used to work with. And I don't think I miss most of my clients. I don't miss most of my clients. But it was great training ground for being a writer. Because look, as a lawyer, all I had in my quiver were words. That was my tools that I used. I would either speak them in court before a judge or a jury, I would write them in a brief. And so that was my whole world. And I know how the power of words, I know how they can persuade and educate and inform people and entertain people. So it was great for me. The transition from being a lawyer to a writer was pretty easy because, again, as a writer, my whole world is about words as well. And I've known Angie for quite a long time. She's a fantastic person. I'm so glad she introduced me to this. And I highly, highly respect her as well. And she was a terrific lawyer, and I think we chose our professions well. I don't miss being a lawyer. It really helped me, as a writer, both on the business end as well, but also my worldview. I I think people understand that, and we have a very technocratic world now where, like AI and computer guys seem to rule everything going on right now. But I've always thought that the best leaders come from people who are liberal arts majors. And what they've done more than anything else is they've read lots of books. And that gives them a wonderful perspective on life where they don't put people in a little box or label people. They look at people and evaluate them individually, because books teach you to do that. And I think that's one of the most important human attributes there is. And the other thing that books teach you, probably above all else, is I think the greatest human quality there is, and that's empathy. Why is it the greatest human quality? Because it leads to all the other wonderful things that people are capable of, like respect and love. If you don't have empathy, you can't have those qualities either. So that's why empathy is so important, and that's why books are so important.
Mhm. Agreed. Thanks everyone for typing in the chat all your questions. I love it. Okay, so Jack asked, the bad attorneys and judges outnumber the good ones in Calamity of Souls. Was that your experience?
Yeah, in Calamity of Souls, certainly the criminal justice system is not a level playing field. If you were a person of color, your chances, one, of finding representation were nil. You have to understand that it wasn't until 1963 in a case called Gideon versus Wainwright that if you were arrested and you had to go to court, you were not entitled to a lawyer. you would either have to represent yourself or, you would just be convicted or have to do a plea agreement and you go to jail. Then you were allowed to have a lawyer after 1963 because the government decided, well, if you're going to be charged with a crime, you probably should be represented by a lawyer. And if you can't afford one, we'll provide one for you. But even with that said, in an area like I write about in Calamity of Souls, it would be very difficult for you to find a white lawyer who would represent the client, Jerome, in a Calamity of Souls. Nobody would want that case. They're not going to get paid a whole lot of money. Their friends and family are going to hate them. So why in the world would they even do it? And then the judges you have to deal with, the judges back then, 1968, so a lot of the judges would have been born around 1900, 1910, smack in the middle of Jim Crow and racism and everything else. So a lot of those people, they were all men at that point, uh, were as racist as the people who had arrested Jerome. So it was a stacked deck against you. And the outcomes usually are 99% of the time you were going to be convicted, whether you were innocent or not. That doesn't really matter. I think some people, because they watch the crime shows on TV and they're always saying, well, the innocent people are always found out. They're innocent, the guilty people go to jail. Lots of innocent people go to jail. Lots of innocent people go to prison for a really long time because it's not like it is on television. You don't get DNA results in like 12 minutes. It takes more like 6 months. And police departments are overworked. Forensic labs are overworked in DC. I live right outside of Washington, DC. They probably have 6,000 bodies in there. They haven't even autopsied it yet because everything's backed up. So justice is not what people think it is in the United States. And when people tell me, so what is justice in the US? I said, well, if you have the money to afford the best representation, you're probably going to get off, and that's why there are no millionaires on death row, even though millionaires have committed murder before. It's just because the criminal justice system in this country is not really based on whether you're innocent or not, unfortunately. And that's the way it was in 1968. I'm not saying it's exactly the way it is today, but it could be a lot better today too.
Cal mentioned after she finished reading The Calamity of Souls, she looked up when it was published because the parallel to our current situation with the haphazard deportation of immigrants without due process is striking.
Yeah, I've my wife and I are trying to put together a consortium of institutions in Virginia to maybe serve as a model for the rest of the country. I think what we're all trying to do right now is just putting band-aids on the situation. I read a statistic that scared me to death where something like 40% of the people under the age of 30 see no value in living in a democracy, which to me is totally terrifying because there are only a few alternatives to democracy and none of them are good, right? You can live in a monarchy, you can live in an autocracy, you can live in a dictatorship, not really where I want to spend my time. So where trying to re-educate people about the value of democracy, the value of civility, the value of compromise, of coming together and seeking common ground, and working together to try to move everybody forward to represent your people as best as you can, but understanding that tribalism and partisanship at the end of the day helps no one. We're just spinning our wheels. We're not moving forward. We have a lot of problems in this country we need to overcome. And we're not getting through those problems just because people are just battering at each other. They don't want to give an inch. And so due process is a really good place to start. I would hazard to say if I walked into a crowd of people and I asked them to define due process for me, a lot of them would struggle with what due process actually represents. And if I asked them to define habeas corpus, I would say that probably 9 out of 10 would not be able to give me a reasonable explanation for what habeas corpus is, which means habeas corpus is when a court says you have somebody in jail, bring the person to me so they can have the right to say, why am I in jail? I have an argument against being in jail, so you need to set me free. It's like bring the body to justice so justice can intervene and say whether this person should be in jail or not. So those things are really important. But here's the thing, if you don't know you have those rights, when they're taken away, you don't miss them, right? So that's why it's so important to understand what rights you have as a US citizen.
Otto also mentioned going beyond labels. Labels are two-dimensional and people are three-dimensional. Yeah, I love that.
That is a great quote. And sometimes they can even be four-dimensional too. I was in Australia over the holidays and I went to an exhibit at a museum in Sydney where there was an artist on exhibition, Julie Maruti. And I was so captivated by her work and the video that I watched about her life that the novel I was working on, I included her and her work in that novel to help me flesh out a character who had bought a piece of her artwork. And because she had bought that artwork and the reasons why she bought it helped to define her character even more. And the one thing that Julie Maruti is all about is labels are for losers. Labels are ridiculous. Putting people in boxes is not where we need to be. Everyone is an individual, and individualism actually makes us all stronger as a group. You know, when you put people in a box, you tend to ignore or devalue them. No one should have that done to them. So I have always been, I base my judgments on people on the individual, not a group. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia with a very ethnic last name. Nobody could pronounce my last name. I was an Italian American. In Richmond, Virginia, if your last name wasn't Lee, Jackson, Stewart, or Davis, nobody really cared. You didn't have a connection to the Confederacy, who cared, right? So I really felt like an outsider for most of my younger days. And I think that's one reason why I ended up being a writer, because a writer has to be an observer. They have to be curious about everything going on around them, because a lot of times that's where you draw your ideas and your power, your creative power from. So for me, the individual is the epicenter of everything. And I love it that people are so different from one another. And, when I was growing up, dyslexia, for instance, was really not diagnosed. Nobody understood it. So if a kid who came into class and they couldn't read for whatever reason, they were just sent to another place and they were put into a box and said, well, that kid can't read, you know. And probably 15 years ago, my Dutch publisher approached me and they said, do you mind if we print your next book? There's a new sort of device out. If we print your book with a special blue ink. And I said, okay, what does it do? He said, well, it allows people who suffer from certain forms of dyslexia, the blue ink, the blue font that we use, they actually then can see what the words actually mean. It was invented by somebody who worked in the field of dyslexia. So I said, absolutely. Because some of the most brilliant people that I've met in my life don't learn like other people. They see the world differently. And when you actually see how they see the world and interpret the world, you understand that they're operating at a different level. There's unbelievable power that they have, intellectual power that they have. I have a character who I write about that has something called synesthesia, where his sensory pathways are commingled in his brain. So he'll see like days of the week outlined in color, or sounds will represent a loud sound might be represented by this huge splash of purple, right? So some of the greatest musicians and artists in the world suffer, I won't say suffer, they have synesthesia. Beethoven and Mozart probably had synesthesia. Some of the greatest singers we have today, musicians we have today, have that sensory pathway commingling in their minds, which means they learn differently, but they have enthralled billions of people with their creative output because of that difference in how they think. That's why this thing we have, the brain, is so absolutely amazing. It can learn in so many different ways and in so many different levels. And that's why we need to embrace all of it. Otherwise, we lose an enormous potential in people. And so for me, boxes and labels, that is like 17th century, and it should be left in the dustbins of history. We need to move forward in a very smart way.
Mhm. I love it. Otto said, preach.
Yeah.
I know. Yes.
Agreed. Um, I thank you, everyone. I want to get to everybody's, comments. Um, so let's see. Let's go with, um, back to what you were saying, David, about that statistic that 30% of yeah. How did youth become so, Jackson asked, how did youth become so uninformed about democracy and the law? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there are a number of things where it used to be that, before the Gutenberg press and books became widely available, we were in the dark ages because there wasn't a shared sort of educational system where people could have access to lots of books to read about things. So that's when myths and, all sorts of fake information ruled the day. People couldn't explain storms, so they came up with gods who had created those storms. That's how it happened. And then people started to have access to books, and then there was sort of a unified, at least, body of knowledge. People who knew what they were talking about could write about things. You can learn about things through books. And that's when we came out of the Dark Ages and went into the Age of Enlightenment. And it's been that way for hundreds of years, where people would, you go to school, you learn, you read books, and you increase your own knowledge base. You have discussions with other people, and it's just this lifelong sort of learning cornucopia. Well, reading levels, have fallen through the floor, over the last 20 years. Probably 20% of the people in this country read more than 2 or 3 books a year. You'll have over half the country never even read a book in this country. A lot of it has now been replaced by social media, where people will spend 13 hours a day looking at their phone. For what? I've never really understood, but they're on their phones wherever you go. You can go in any place in the country, go into a restaurant, watch people in their cars, anywhere, and they've got their phone out and they're scrolling through their phone. Okay, I get the temptation because it's instant information, whatever. But those are 9 or 10 hours a day that you could be devoted to actually increasing your knowledge base through reading books. And then you learn a lot about a lot of things. And you understand the great thing about reading books is it teaches you all the mistakes of the past. And if you don't understand and know history, you're doomed to repeat those same mistakes. And for the people who think that democracy, is no big deal, we're going to celebrate our 250th anniversary next year in this country. The United States is the longest lasting, sustainable, continuous democracy in the history of Earth. Think about that. We've only been around for 249 years. There are lots of countries out there. England has been around for over millennia, over 1,000 years. A lot of countries in Europe have been around for over 2,000 years. So we're an infant. It's still not certain that, democracies are sustainable, you know. And I think a lot of it is because people have sort of abdicated the role as citizens. To be a citizen in a democracy is an awesome responsibility. In many countries, you don't have the right to vote because there are no elections. The people that are ruling you are just going to keep on ruling you. And sometimes you have elections in countries like Russia where the elections don't matter because they're all fixed. So as a citizen of a democracy, you have a responsibility to educate yourself about what democracy is about, educate yourself about positions of people running for election, and then going to the voting booth and actually voting when half the people in this country don't even vote. Half the people in the United States who have the right to vote never come out to vote. So that's half the population completely off the board. You have to go in and make informed and good choices about, who you're going to vote for and who will then be leading the country for the next 2 years, 4 years, whatever. What I don't want people to do is they go onto a podcast a day before the election and somebody on the podcast says, vote for that guy. And then 10 million of them do.
Mhm.
That's not a sustainable model for a democracy. So I think that's why some people are like, what's the big deal about a democracy? The big deal would be try the other forms of government and see how you like them.
Yeah, Carissa also added recently saw a statistic about 54% of the people in the US read at a sixth grade level or below.
Yeah.
That's shocking.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's again in the information age, which we're in right now, I read a stat somewhere back where the average person today will have more information in front of them that they have to process in a month than their grandparents and their great grandparents had in their entire lives. That's how fast information now flows at you over the course of time. And it's only going to accelerate even more. So we need to be able to read at a high level. When I say to read, I also mean another verb, to think, because you can't do one without the other, right? Because if you're thinking about something and you haven't read anything about it, how are you supposed to process anything to arrive at a decision in your mind? So to read and to think are just things that are synonymous. You can't do one without the other. And reading at a sixth grade level in the 21st century is really not going to cut it because all of a sudden you miss all the nuances and signals and underlying text that are critically important. And it's even more important these days because we are smack in the age of disinformation as well. And let me tell you, as bad as it is now, it's only going to get worse because with AI getting stronger and more powerful day by day. And I was just on Capitol Hill testifying before the United States Senate last week about AI because they took all of my books for part of their large language models without my permission or compensating me to put into their AI learning model. They have taken pretty much every book ever published, every academic paper ever published, stolen them all to use to train their large language models. So in the very near future, using AI, you will be able to define reality and make it very convincing to people that this is actually true. And if you don't read at a high level and you can't work your way through that disinformation, then things are going to get a little hairy for all of us. That's why it's so important that, we have to take individual responsibility for going out, reading as much as we can, learning as much as we can, and not just sort of being sheep following the herd.
Yeah. Jack says thieves. I
Yes, I
mean,
agree. I agree. They are.
Otto says read, process, comprehend, and act.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And in that order as well.
Yes. Um, Napster was sued and shut down doing that with music. Why are we letting this happen? That's what
But
Otto's.
yeah, so the argument that the AI companies are making, this was after it was found out they were taking all this stuff, using a lot of very stealthy ways to do it, using private servers and blah blah blah. They said, well, we're able to do it because what we're doing with AI is so transformational that copyright law should not apply to us. Um, and that really is their sole argument. And I said, well, my argument to that was, well, guess what else is transformational? Books. In fact, books have been far more transformational than anything AI could come up with because it has transformed civilization since the first books came out. It's transformed how we do everything in our lives and actually who we become as people. But that's the argument they're making. Hopefully, it won't be the one that prevails. I'm in the middle of a class action lawsuit against all the AI companies right now. It's one of the reasons they asked me to come down and testify. So I want to be able to protect the creative world for the new writers coming up behind me, the new artists coming up behind me, the new filmmakers coming up behind me, the podcasters coming up behind me. Because if you don't have copyright protection for your material and you can't get paid for your material and make a living doing it, then you won't be doing it, right? And so all these new writers and new voices we should hear will never be there. And that's not something that I ever want to allow happen.
Mhm. Otto's like, go get it, David. Um, Cal also mentioned what's troubling is that so few people are educated enough to understand the importance of electing officials who know what a democracy is and want to protect that. After all, we have a Department of Homeland Security Secretary who can't tell you what habeas corpus is, and many in the country don't care, don't know enough to care.
Yeah, it is. I read all of that and sometimes I get really depressed and disheartened by it as well. But at the end of the day, we were in Australia, New Zealand for 2 months over the holidays. We left in December, we came back in February, and it was mostly fun. My kids are all grown, so they flew down for 3 weeks to stay with us, and we traveled all over Australia and New Zealand. It was a wonderful places. I've been all over the world, but those places are pretty special. And my last speech before I came back was in February, and I told the crowd that, we leave to go home tomorrow and we're going back to a different country. The one I left in December is very different from the one I'm going back to in February. But if we all lay down and assume the fetal position and don't stand up for what we believe in and keep fighting forward for what I think is a wonderful country with enormous potential still, then I can't think of what else would be worth fighting for. This country has enormous potential. It's done a lot of enormously good things too. We've had our challenges and problems. God knows we have. And we're still working through a lot of them. But at the end of the day, would I rather be in this country or a place overseas that doesn't respect women, that doesn't allow you to vote, Does it allow certain people to go to school, to be educated? I'd like to be right here, and I'd like for all us to keep working to make sure that we remain this, shining beacon on the hill that other countries can look to and think that's what we want to be.
Mhm. Gotta make sure. Cody mentioned he's like, David is greater than ChatGPT.
Thank
Books
you.
are great. Agreed. Books are greater, artists are greater. We just need people to keep reading, processing, comprehending, and acting. Um, so I want to go back to Otto mentioned talking about disability in your novels. Um, Lucy has an intellectual and developmental disability, and then also there's Imogene's depression, Molly's mom PTSD, and self-judgment and shame that loved ones feel that they can't do more, quote unquote, can't do more. And then Hilly had to be hospitalized from her guilt and grief, and Molly's dad was driven to murder, and Ignatius became a secret agent to continue Imogene's work. Wow. Um, Otto, was there a question with but I guess
He's a very careful reader, that's for sure. That's wonderful.
I guess tell us more about writing disability in your novels and what inspired you to come up with those storylines and characters.
Some of the characters like Lucy Lee in A Calamity of Souls, my cousin was developmentally challenged. She was born that way, and or back then her and I tell this story. This is the reason it happened to Lucy Lee, and this also happened to my cousin, where my aunt went to the dentist to have some dental work done. She didn't know that she was pregnant. They gave her nitrous oxide, and that caused her child in the womb to be born developmentally challenged. And that can happen. That's why they tell you these days, if you think you're pregnant, don't do these certain things, or they can give you some other type of anesthesia because those drugs are very harmful to fetuses in the womb. And so I grew up with my cousin. She's no longer living, but I grew up with my cousin, every day as a kid growing up. And I saw the challenges for everyone, both with her, and she later developed cancer. And because she didn't have the ability to sort of understand what was going on with her body, she would just tell everybody, it just hurts, it just hurts, it just hurts. And that gave me just great empathy for people who have challenges that I will never have in my life, you know, and it's a way to be able to work trying to improve everyone's life at the same time, but also giving everyone an opportunity. Just because you have challenges doesn't mean you're disabled in any way. It just means that with the right sort of tools and environment, you can thrive just like everyone else. And life itself is a challenge. And the characters I wrote about in a Calamity and Strangers in Time, those things happen to people over life. Trauma can make you have PTSD. Um, Depression can destroy you. The brain is, you can't just give a pill to the brain or have a surgery to fix your brain if you're depressed. Depression is one of those things that just takes a long time to overcome and with a lot of work too. And so I just, as I write up my novels, I'm writing about real people, at least in my mind, real characters. And in order to do that, they have to face the same challenges that real people do in life. And we all have those challenges. We all suffer from some sort of thing. Life is not perfect. I'm never going to write about a perfect person because I've never met one in my entire life. I write about people who get up every day and try to do the best they can with what they have. And they try to see that the next day might be a little bit better. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. But that's what life is about. So I'm writing about a world that includes everyone. People are having good days and people are having bad days. People have special issues with their lives, and that pretty much is everybody. Because again, everyone has issues that they have to deal with. Some, are maybe a little more prominent than others, but it's a question of degrees, not of just whether they have it or not. We all do.
Mhm. Otto mentioned you did a great job with authentic representation of disabled individuals and families and in society. Mhm.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I tried very hard to do that. You take on a storyline like that and you really have to do it justice. Otherwise, I never want to include anything in a book to be gratuitous. It has to be an integral part of what the story is about. And then you really have to build that out in a really authentic way. Otherwise, I don't know what you're doing. You're just wasting pages.
He said, what you mentioned is also
Okay.
a great example why systems of communication are so important. Otto, I mean, I know Otto's told us a million times of him and his friends have been put in perpetual preschool because they were non-speaking. And even though they were brilliant and people were bringing them, books that kindergartners read instead of until they started to type and they were able to show the world that, they know so much more. The more fertilizer, the more beautiful the blooms.
It's very true. Again, it's all about realizing the potential that people have. And I my kids grew up in Fairfax County, Virginia, which is a very affluent county. There's a lot of money there. They went to Catholic school though. I wasn't raised Catholic. I was one of the few Italian Americans raised as a Baptist in Richmond, Virginia, because pretty much everybody in Richmond was a Baptist. But there you go. We all had our faith, right? Uh,
Mhm.
and um, students there in Catholic school who had special challenges often were sent to the public school because the Catholic schools, while well-meaning, they did not have, you know, the things that these students required just because they just didn't have the expertise, they didn't have funding for that or whatever. But Fairfax County did. I wish every place in the country would have those capabilities. Quite frankly, they would if they spent their money wisely. We spend so much of our government dollars on things that, for me, how many more atomic weapons do we need? How many more aircraft carriers do we need? Missiles do we need? Blah, blah, blah. And every time there's a recession or times are tight, guess what they cut? They cut education. Why? Because those kids can't vote yet. My politician friends tell me anyway. So they can cut that and not worry about it at the voting booth, right? But if we poured more money into education so that all kids, all young people, with whatever issues and challenges they have in their life, can be in an environment that allows them to thrive, the rewards of that are priceless. You know, these people will go on to change the world and change the lives of so many people in a positive way. Now, how much would you spend if you could have that outcome? I would spend a whole lot, but it's about getting people to understand that equation. If you only care about a return on investment, I'm telling you that if you allow every young person to realize the potential, no matter how they learn, the return on investment would be enormous for all of us. If we could just get that message through to more people who are in a position to do something about it, then I think we'd be doing well.
Yeah. Cal mentioned, how do we make reading cool again?
Hi, Cal.
It's, I think that when I was in school, you were given a syllabus and they tell you what books you had to read, right? Books should be empowering. I would allow students to pick their own books. What are you interested in? You're interested in comic books, you're interested in mysteries, you're interested in romanticises, whatever you're interested in, go find those books and read them, have fun, come back and tell us about them. And then once you do, go back and read a bunch more, and come back and tell us about them. Because once you get kids reading because they love to do it and they're finding stories that speak to them and worlds that speak to them, then all of a sudden it's not a chore to read a book. If I tell you got to read this book, the first thing you're gonna do is like, I don't want to read that book. That book seems boring to me. Why? Because you told me I had to read it. I'd rather go out and discover my own stuff to read. So I think that's one way you get more people to read. If schools would say, I don't really care what you're going to read. You read something you're really interested in, and you got to come in and tell us about it, or write a paper about it, and entertain us and inform us about what you think is cool. And I think if you do that very simple maneuver, all of a sudden, I think kids are going to start reading a whole lot more again because it's empowering. They have control over it. And let's face it, kids' lives are very structured. And as a parent of kids who are now in their 30s, I tell you the structure is important. Structure is a way for you to show your kids that you care about them. If you tell your kids, go do what you want to do, that sounds fun, but it's also the message is the parent, I don't really care what you do. I don't care if you thrive or not. So structure is important, but empowering kids is also important too. I want them to love reading. I don't want them to think of it as a chore.
Mhm. You know what, David? I love what you're saying. I just wanted to say that's what we're trying to do at Autism Tree since you're here today. Our every heartbeat is for each, individual family we do one family at a time for 22 years. And just you being here is such a testament. I don't even know what more doors it'll open, but that's what we're trying to do. And I know Angie knows that. We're just trying to open as many doors as possible and get behind Otto and the Mod Squad of changing the narrative. And I just think I'm just literally speechless of so I never imagined to learn this much from you, even though I've been like studying you and watching all your stuff, even back to Absolute Power. I just watched it and I was just mind blown. A to Z, like the acting, that did your book. It was just wow. I wonder today, I want to make sure this time we have with you, I would be curious, what did you think today was going to be like? And is there anything we could do right now? Do you want to meet some of the people that are on this? I really care about, I don't know what your normal experience is when you go to a book club.
Okay.
So maybe you could just share with me, what did you think it was going to be like? And what can we do right now to make sure you don't leave with like, oh, I wish we had done that.
Well, I had when I go in to do book club chats like this, I usually go in with, I try not to have many expectations. I just want to experience it because everyone is a little bit different. When Angie told me about this program and wanted me to become involved, I couldn't say no. I was interested. I was very interested in this because, again, I was talking about my nephew and some of his friends as well. And I don't want anybody, because I felt this as a child growing up in Richmond. I don't want anyone to feel left out or labeled or boxed in any way, because it's not fair. It's not humane. It's not the right thing to do. And also, again, you lose an enormous amount of potential from people if you don't put them in a situation where they can thrive. So coming in here today, I thought I was going to learn a lot, and I have. And I would love to meet some of the people on the chat as well, because that's the whole point of it. And throughout my entire life, I have I've traveled around the world meeting people from all walks of life, and people who are as different from me in certain respects as can be. But when you sit down and you actually have an interaction with them, you realize that we have so much more in common than what separates us. And I think if people could, and the best way to meet people if you can't travel anywhere is to open up a book, because you can meet people everywhere on the page who, again, you probably may never meet in real life. That doesn't make the experience even any less. Sometimes it could be even more than you can, because if you meet somebody in real life, you chat with them for 15 minutes and then it's over. With a book, guess what? You get to go back and revisit them anytime you want on the page. You can read it over and over, and your imagination can keep going and going. And all of a sudden, you build out this fully fledged relationship with somebody that you never met for real, but it feels real to you. So whatever expectations I might have had coming in today, they've been exceeded because, a day where I don't learn something new or I don't meet somebody I haven't met before, I consider it a lost day in my life. And the older you get, the fewer lost days you want to have because you don't have as many ahead of you as you once did.
Oh. Um, well, let's open up for questions that you can like have a more personal touch with David then. Cal, do
Yes.
you want to start? I know you've been really active on this.
You're on mute, Cal.
Can you unmute?
Okay, here I am.
Yay.
Can
Maybe say a little bit like where your name, where you are, and whatever else you want. But you got
so
to
my
a
name
little short.
is Cal Chang, and I grew up actually in Atlanta. I'm an immigrant, which I'm like scared to say out loud these days. I'm an immigrant. We came when I was about 5 years old. My family still lives in the South in Atlanta. I live in San Diego and have for 20, 21 years now. Um, I just, it's interesting. One of the first things you said, David, is talking about whether or not this particular book, in terms of the Calamity of Souls, was relevant. And as soon as you said that, I was like, what? Like, of course it's relevant, right? And And the fact that it took so, and I don't mean this negatively, but it took you time to write it, and to the point where it became even more relevant as time passed, which is kind of unfortunate because that makes me feel like we're moving backwards. Um, but it also really makes me happy in that the timing couldn't have been better. I think one of the things that really struck me too about the novel is that, as we live in such a divided time and country right now, we all know and love people who don't share our political opinions, and that's okay, I guess. No, I'm just joking. Yes, it's of course it's okay. But what I think is great is, when you read something like The Civil Rights, which most people I like to believe have a very strong reaction about and kind of know the right or wrong. Yet when you see the parallels are so striking, it's like, well, wait a minute, right? Like, so I love that it's and even I guess unintentional on your part because of when it was published, but there's this um, tacit lesson almost that carries over. And so I really, really appreciate that because it is a really scary time. And so I appreciate you taking the time to be here and talk about it as a whole and just even, A Stranger in Time, which I have not read yet, but it's on in my queue. And would love to see how that continues to speak to what's happening today.
I appreciate your thoughts a lot. When I'm, from a family of immigrants, my grandfather immigrated from Italy at the turn of the last century. Um, and but for him coming over here, I wouldn't be here. He immigrated through Ellis Island in New York. A lot of people don't realize that a lot of Western Europeans found New York City too cold. So back then they got on the train and got off the first stop in the South, and that was Richmond, Virginia. There's a large population of Italians in Richmond, Virginia, just because of the weather, which is like something. So for me, both as a human being, as an American, and also as from being from a family of immigrants, and also as a lawyer, what's going on in this country right now regarding immigration is beyond terrible. It's beyond deplorable. It's beyond wrong. Because we are a nation of immigrants, and the melting pot that people always tout, that's exactly what it means. It means people from all over the world come here and create new lives and move forward and have families and do wonderful things and have jobs and become Americans. That's what we're supposed to be. I don't know where that message was lost. I sort of know where it was lost. But I've also found when you first started speaking, talking about, you have to love and get along with the people who may not agree with you politically. When I sit down with people who I know are on the other side of the aisle for me, and I don't talk about politics, but I just talk about humanity, about hardworking people who got picked up outside of a Home Depot and were taken away from their family, and the only thing wrong they did was that they came into this country and didn't fill out all the paperwork or didn't finalize things just because they were fleeing danger. They were trying to build a better life for their family, and that was their only crime. And now we are flying them off to South Sudan, where they don't even speak the language. Now, for me, that's criminal. That should never be allowed to happen. So when I talk to people at that level and sort of explain that scenario, then all of a sudden I know people who, are on their other side of the political aisle for me, they arrive at the same conclusion that I did. That's wrong. My God, nobody should be subjected to that. So sometimes when you have these discussions, if you just get it back to the human level and explain that sort of set of facts, unless you have not a shred of empathy in your soul, I think most people would go, that's wrong. That should not be allowed. So maybe that's one part of how we sort of, rebuild this country, from one conversation to another.
And it also struck me too that, you referenced the Loving versus Virginia case a few times. And here we are, I guess, 70 years later almost. And we're kind of revisiting that, aren't we? I mean,
Yeah,
at least with the comments from some people in the Supreme Court. And so I think that's something that I thought about when I read it. It's like, wow, here we are this many years later, and we're talking about this again.
right.
Um,
I have
so
a special connection to Loving v. Virginia case. And when I was sworn into the bar, back in 1986 in Virginia, the Chief Justice of the Virginia Supreme Court swore the class in. And when I became a published author, I became really good friends with him. And he was a wonderful person, deeply empathetic, and as fair-minded as you would find in anyone. Well, when Loving v. Virginia was argued, he was the Attorney General of Virginia, so it's his job to argue that miscegenation should not be allowed in this country, that races should not be allowed to marry. And we had long discussions about that later on when he was in his 80s and his 90s. And that was one of those cases where it was his job, because of what the position he held, that he felt obligated to make that argument. Not one that he necessarily believed, although he was a person of his generation. He was born like in 1895. So, and being born where he was, there's no generational stuff is no excuse. There's right and there's wrong, but then there's reality and you just have to deal with it. But I do know that, that was a particularly calamitous challenge for him to go into court and make that argument when he didn't necessarily believe it was right. Maybe it would have been better if he had resigned his position and said, I'm not going to do this. So have somebody else do it. But you're absolutely right that with the Supreme Court that we have right now, and I've met several of them, I have no idea where it's going to go from this point forward. The decisions they made over the last 6 months, I never thought any Supreme Court would ever do, but then I've been proven wrong. So I don't look at them really as a court of law anymore. I just look at them as sort of as a group of partisan players, unfortunately, because right now we needed a true Supreme Court more than ever right now, and unfortunately we don't have it.
Yeah, constitutional law has kind of gone out the window, hasn't it?
It has. It has.
I want to give a shout out to Autolana and his family as well, who's all joining us from all over. So yeah, Addison and Lauren are joining from Miami, and Zach as well. I don't know if you're in LA or San Diego. LA. Awesome. And Zach's been asking such good questions, and I'm so sorry, Zach, I didn't get to any of your questions yet, but do you want to ask one? Just
Please, yeah.
get one chance.
Sure. Yeah. Hi, David. Nice to meet you. Zach's brother. Such an honor. Quick question for you. A lot of musicians listen to their own music sometimes, and they're like, "That was pretty good." Do you ever pick up one of your old novels and reread them, and you go, "Wow, I did pretty good on that one."
Yes, I've done that, but usually I pick them up and go, "Oh, I could have done much better." I got to work harder next time out. Sometimes it's like, you know, you're your own best critic. But as a writer, no matter what you do, I don't care whether you're a writer, you write music, you write books, you do films or whatever. The one thing, it's a craft, and you're an apprentice to the craft for life. You're never going to master it. So the only thing you can try to do is get better with each project going out. And that's what I try to do. So sometimes when I go back and read, I have to say that, I've written scripts for screenplays for movies as well, and had some of my stuff adapted where I've written some of the screenplays for the feature films. And you take a 400-page book and you have to turn it into a 100-page screenplay. A lot of stuff has to come out. But it also made me think too that I could be a lot more concise in my novels. The greatest American political speech of all time was made in 1863 by Abraham Lincoln. It's called the Gettysburg Address. The speech was only 360 words long. Lincoln was able to speak it in about 2 minutes. A lot of people who attended Gettysburg, the consecration of Gettysburg, didn't even realize he had said the Gettysburg Address, because the congressman who spoke before him from Pennsylvania spoke for 2.5 hours. Nobody remembers who he was or what he said, but everybody remembers the Gettysburg Address because it was a brilliant distillation of what the country needed to know at that moment in time. And every word had earned its right to be in the speech. And so when I write a novel, I sort of hold that up as the holy grail of every word that I write in either a book or a script has to earn the right to be in there. If it doesn't, then it has to come out. So I've learned that going on. And, and I think some of my earlier novels, I said in 100 words what I could have said much more effectively in 10. So now I always try to strive for the 10 words versus the 100.
Thank you. Really appreciate that.
I love that.
Mhm.
Also, Lauren and Addison, go ahead. You have your hand raised.
Hi, I'm Lauren, and my question kind of goes off of Zach's. Something you mentioned earlier that I agree with about students and how they should be able to kind of pick their own books that they read, and like in order to get people to kind of discover reading and their love for it more. And I feel like I have grown up being a reader, but a lot of the books that we are like told to read in school went right over my head. And then like later on in life, reading them again, I've found that they've actually been super like meaningful to me. I guess so. I'm just wondering, like, what are some books or authors that you've read that have kind of changed your life as a younger person and like at this just throughout your life?
Well, I grew up in the South. I read a lot of Southern fiction writers early on, Walker Percy and Truman Capote, and even William Faulkner. Yeah, I know people find him very difficult to read, and he is difficult to read. Trust me, I put down many a Faulkner book, but some of the passages are very meaningful and memorable, and they stay with you. Uh, And I found that the best books, and this may sort of amplify what you just said, sometimes you find a book that's a classic that everybody says you should read, but you discovered at a moment in your life when you're not ready to accept what the book has to give.
Mhm.
And for me, when I read To Kill a Mockingbird the first time, I was probably 12 or 13 years old. And I got out of Mockingbird. It was a really cool kids' adventure where they went and had a lot of fun. And that's really all I got out of it. I went back and read Mockingbird later when I was in college in my 20s, and I understood far more what the book was actually about. And I go back and reread books like that. I go back and read Huckleberry Finn. I go back and read The World According to Garp, and a lot of the other books that I read early on because I was not ready to receive all that the book had to give.
Mhm.
And the best books grow with you as you mature, and you can understand that the book, different levels of engagement in the book are now ready for you to take full advantage of. And that's a wonderful thing because sometimes, you think a book is one and done and it has nothing left to give. Oh, no, it does. It has a lot more left to give because it depends on you growing older, you growing up, facing challenges in life. Because at 18, yeah, you've experienced a lot. At 40, you've experienced a lot more, particularly if you had children of your own. And so that's why books like that, you can revisit them again and again and learn more each time out.
Mhm. Love that answer.
I have a sorry, I have a question as well. I'm Addison, one of Otto's older brothers. First off, thank you for being here. This was so just on point, and I feel like it resonated with a lot of people, especially just with your talk about empathy and how a lot of people who seem to not care is really just that they maybe haven't been exposed to someone that deals with issues like, whatever they're exposed to, wherever this person is dealing with, and that it doesn't, they don't lack empathy, they just lack exposure. So that's why talking about books and traveling was so like on point, and just meeting people. I wanted to ask about in the process of writing, and you're saying how being not self-critical, but having like a high standard for every word earning a right to being in the text. How do you separate like on your end when you're writing, being too self-critical if you're in like a writer's block or whatever, and you're like, oh, nothing seems to be good, versus knowing something could be better and not being hard on yourself, and just it's like advice you have for not just writers or just anyone in that struggling with that, I guess.
No, that's a great question. It's a very nuanced question too, which I like. Every day for me, any writer is different. Some days are good, some days are not so good. Some days the words flow perfectly and you feel good about the characters, and other days you can't put a credible thought down on a piece of paper. It just is not coming. And that used to frustrate me a lot early on in my career, and then I realized it's all part of the process. And when I am sort of stuck on things, and that happens, more often than I would like, it does, but that's again all part of it. You have to realize that when you're creating something, it didn't exist before you thought of it. So there's no template really for you to use. It's the first time anyone's ever done it, right? Um, I will often go away. I tend to work on multiple writing projects at the same time. I will go and work on another project and take my mind off of it. And I know that a certain level of my subconscious is still sort of digging away at the issue that was confronting me on the other writing project. And then eventually it will get solved or I'll work a way around it. Um, no day is alike. This is not an assembly line where most people, they get really good at something by doing the same thing over and over and over again, to get all the errors out and then different movements out. And you just, assembly line, you push through a million products, same product, you do it the same way each time. The creative world is not like that at all. You never want to do it the same because then all of a sudden every book reads the same. You don't want that. I've written almost 60 novels now, and the challenge for me is to keep myself fresh and active. And how do I do that? It's by getting out of my comfort zone, scaring myself, writing books like A Calamity of Souls or Strangers in Time, which I'd never done before, and not knowing if I could actually pull it off or not. But I have to tell you that, fear is a great antidote to complacency. It really is. And if you're afraid of something, you sort of raise your game a little bit. You have a little chip on your shoulder, like, okay, I'm not going to fail at this. I'm going to bring my A game because I have to, because I'm really not certain of the outcome on this. So in the creative world, again, it's different from a lot of other jobs. I always do the example, I fly a lot around different places. And so I would never get on a plane where the pilot that day said, I've flown this plane the same way for 25 years. Today, I'm going to try something different. I would not want to be on that plane. But as a writer, you can have little work thing rituals that you do, and there's nothing wrong with that. But as far as the creative process, it's always going to be different, and that's always a little bit scary. But also at the end of the day, you have to realize that nothing you're going to write is either set in stone or is going to be perfect. So you have to get to the point where I have a story that I want to finish. If I demand of myself things that I cannot achieve because I want absolute perfection in every facet, then nobody's ever going to read a word of what I've written because the book is never going to be finished and then published. So it's a creative aspect to what I do, but at the end, and you pointed this out in your question, there's a realistic, pragmatic aspect to it as well. That at some point during this process, you have to say, finito, enough. I'm done. I'm ready to deliver this to the world and then move on to the next story.
Thank you.
David, I want to be respectful of your time. If you tell us how much time you have, then we can gauge what we'll do next.
Yeah, I probably got about another 10 minutes because as I said before, I'm in my friend's office at a restaurant because my internet is down. All the stuff feedback. In fact, this is not my storylines or anything. I think it's the role of employees to work here tonight.
I love it. Well, let's for sure take a picture with you so we don't lose anyone. And then I think we're going to do at least 3 more questions. There's 3 people I definitely want to introduce you to before we leave.
Let's do. Yes, please.
Okay, so everybody smile. We're going to do a picture in this.
Yeah, just look at your camera and I'll do a countdown. Ready? 3, 2, 1, cheese. Got it.
David, I want you to know our chairman, who's also my husband, Todd Hoff, is on here. And I want to thank you, Todd, for making time. I think he's also at his office at work. I would just be curious, Todd did his first podcast, he was interviewed or something. And I have to imagine, Todd, that it was amazing to just listen to David today, just after doing what you did, because it's kind of a unique thing. But say whatever you like, and thank you for being here.
Oh my God, David. You remind me of a gentleman I met, Peter Jennings, a news anchor, and I had the privilege to spend a little time with him. Your articulation, your ability to talk 360 degrees about the world and put it in such kind words is powerful. But I want to tell a story because you've inspired me today. I am a young dyslexic 59-year-old. Reading books is difficult for me. My young son read 100 books one summer, and I read 1. But listening to you today has inspired me that I need to read more books. So I think it's important when you spend your time at your level that you understand the impact that you make on people. And that was the impact I wanted to leave you with, is you got somebody that's going to read a couple more books this year. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I tell people everywhere I go that the more people who read books, the better the world will be. Because one, it just makes better people, more curious people, more empathetic people. And also, if you have high reading skills, you're going to realize your socioeconomic potential as well. You're going to have a better job. You can take care of your family better. And what happens when all that happens? Well, all of our social ills like poverty and hunger and homelessness and crime all go away because they're all tied to illiteracy. We started feeding body and mind years ago because, feeding challenges and food and hunger are tied to illiteracy. If you're illiterate, chances are very, very high that your kids will also face reading challenges, and their kids will face reading challenges. I've never seen a bad result from too many books being in a home. I've seen many bad results from no books being in a home. So I know how important that is. And I can tell right away when I talk to people who's a reader and who's not a reader. There's just different level of humanity coming from this different level of curiosity, coming from people who read a lot of books. And it's just, again, it changed my life completely. I mean, I grew up in a totally segregated world. And I grew up with a lot of people who thought that was perfectly fine. And I could have fallen into that trap. And really the only thing that saved me, my family was an important part of that too. But I can't say that my family, was totally against the world that they also were in as well. But it really was my interaction with books and through it, the people of the world that made me who I am today. I think broadly because books taught me that's what you have to do. You have to think broadly.
David, I think if you're okay with it, I want to close with the little time we have and give deep gratitude. First to you, of course. There's no way I could have imagined today would be everything you brought is far exceeds my imagination. And I've been reading since I can remember. And I love what you just said. That made me feel even more excited to keep reading. But um, Danielle Levy is a family that helped Autism Tree start 22 years ago. Her father is a pediatric neurosurgeon, and we've just always been together since Autism Tree started. And Danielle, I'm mind blown because Danielle is in the middle of med school and she's following in her father's footsteps. And I don't even know how she's here. And if you saw how she runs our book club, she runs it like an Ivy League college book class, which works perfectly for Otto and the Mod Squad. So I'm going to pass it to Danielle, and then Danielle, you pass it to Otto, and that's how we'll close it. Okay, everybody? And this has been amazing. So go ahead, Danielle.
Sorry, is the music loud in the background or is it
No,
okay?
we can't hear anything but you.
I hope we're not taking you away from doing good on your exam. I know it's coming.
No, you're fine. It's good to take a break. Um, yeah, immense gratitude for coming today. Thank you so much. I empathize a lot with the reading component that you mentioned. I feel like I gravitated towards books, probably more so like classic fiction starting around 14. I had a group of friends in high school that kind of would name old authors, and it was like creds if you read them, whatever. And that's kind of how I started. Um, and I guess the bigger the book, the better. I love Faulkner. I haven't read him in a really long time, but yeah, I think that that was a huge lifeline for me, and I think that irrespective of what I went through, kind of the things that I was reading, even if they weren't necessarily directly relevant or if it was a different world that I was in, um, it just kind of kept me on my path, whatever that was. That's like a feeling I have, but I don't necessarily know how, or what quite that means just yet, maybe, but it felt like a rope to hold on to of some sort, if that makes sense. Um,
Yeah, it does. Absolutely.
yeah, I love Hemingway, stuff like that, just like really classic stuff. Um, so yeah, everything you were saying really made sense to me, and we really appreciate you coming.
I appreciate the offer to come. I've learned a lot today, and this again, a day that goes by where you don't learn something and meet people you haven't met before is a wasted day. So I've checked my boxes off for today, and I thank you so much. I really, next time I talk to Angie, I'm going to thank her hands down for hooking me up and connecting me with all of you. I
Right.
want to continue the relationship too. I don't want this to be a one and done because what you're doing is incredibly important, and my wife and I like to get behind causes that are really important.
Perfect. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. I think for me especially, I've I've always, liked the older stuff, and so it's helpful for me to pick up things by authors that are alive. So, I think at first I was kind of like holding on to that old habit where it was like, this classic whatever, but the books that are where you can talk with the authors, I think are helpful because it adds a new dimension to it. So,
It does.
yeah, Dead Russians, exactly. Um, but anyway, Otto, if you wanted to pick up from there.
Let me see if he's
Nobel Prize acceptance speech in 1950, William Faulkner spoke about the moral obligation, the poet's and the writer's duty to write about how man is immortal, because he has a soul, a spirit capable of compassion and sacrifice and endurance. That is what I have found while reading your last two novels. You have helped man endure by lifting his heart, by reminding him of the courage and hope and pride and compassion and pity and sacrifice that have been the glory of his past. The writer's voice is one that helps him endure and prevail. Can you tell us your motivation to write this type of historical fiction?
To quote Faulkner in Requiem for a Nun, he wrote that the past is never dead, it's not even past. And if you think about that sentence, it punches way above its weight. And I think what Faulkner really wanted to tell people through that line is that what came before often dictates, not entirely, but often dictates what is going to come next. And then it's up to us, the people who are living in the current generation, to decide how much of that we want to accept, how much we want to change, and how much we want to move forward in a different way. But if you don't understand the past, it's very difficult for you to make that transition. And sometimes you repeat those mistakes as well. In my two books, they're both one in 1968 and one in 1944. They're both relevant, even though many, many years have passed since then. Why? Because the one static in that equation are human beings. Shakespeare built his career on writing about human strengths and human weaknesses. Well, guess what? 500 years ago, um, people loved and lost and were angry and jealous and bitter and happy and sad. Fast forward 500 years, they still do all of those things as well. It's just a different time period, the same sort of level of emotion. And so that's why stories transcend time, because they still are inhabited by people. And people, while they change over time in certain ways, there's foundational levels to us all that don't really change a whole lot, depending on what we're confronted with. So when I write about books in the past, what I'm really trying to tell people is everything in this book is applicable to your lives right now. So read this book, think about it, make really good decisions, tell people, everyone you know, to read other books, as many as they can, and try to move forward in a positive way. And if more people do that than not, then I really think I feel good about the future.
Wow. Perfect way to end this amazing day. Thank you so much, David.
It's incredible.
Thank you,
This is
everyone.
one of my favorite days we've ever had in the foundation. It far exceeds just what we've done at book club. It's like top 10 day in the history of our foundation in 22 years. Sincerely. You knocked it out of the park.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Bye, everybody.